Hi and welcome to this special question and answer video on dahlias. Just take a look at them. Aren't they gorgeous? Now I've searched Google to find the most looked for questions about this fantastic plant. First Google question, where are dahlias native to? Well, they are in fact from Mexico. Now, they're a national flower of the country. That's how important they are. And dahlias have a rich history dating back to the Aztec Empire. The Aztec name for dahlia translates to water pipe flower. And this is because the Aztecs used to hollow out Dahlia imperialis stems to transport water around. The flowers were named dahlias in honor of the scientist Anders Dahl in 1791. Another big question is, are dahlias perennials? Well, the answer, of course, is yes. Dahlias are perennials. Specifically, they're tender perennials, meaning they require some protection from freezing temperatures. Which garden style is best suited for dahlias? Well, I find dahlias work well in most garden styles. There's so many different colours to choose from. You'll see them often in cottage garden inspired borders, and thanks to their Central American heritage, they're also a great treat in exotic garden designs too. How do you grow dahlias from seed is a big question. Well, it is possible to grow dahlias from seed, of course, but they're often grown as tubers. Now, if you're trying to grow them from seed, sow them between February and April in about 1/2 centimetre deep trays of moist peat-free compost. Make sure to leave them in a warm position, preferably between 15 and 20 degrees Celsius, and under cover to make sure you're protecting them from cooler temperatures. You then can transplant the dahlias into small pots once the seedlings are large enough to handle. Then once the risk of frost has passed, I don't know, May, June time, then you can move your plants out into the garden gradually. Then plant them up. Now, how long does it take for dahlias to germinate from seed? That's quite a reasonable question. Dahlia will typically germinate between 10 days and a fortnight. This might happen quicker if they're growing in warmer environment between 15 and 20 degrees Celsius. And flowers will appear as soon as 10 weeks after sowing, depending on the weather. Another good question, what are seeds versus tubers? Well, Dahlia tuber is harvested off the parent plant, meaning that what you grow will be identical to the original plant. You're taking a clone from it effectively. So you know exactly what you're getting. Whereas seeds result in random specimens based upon genetics in pollination. You don't know the size or the colour of your dahlia until they flower. That's what happens when you go from seed. And here's a good question, are dahlias easy to grow? Well, they are. They're relatively easy, particularly when you grow the dahlias from tubers. And you buy these from most garden centres. And it's as simple as planting the tubers into peat-free multi-purpose compost or directly into the ground. You can start them off in a greenhouse if you wish. The shoots will appear after 2 to 3 weeks. Here's a question, how and where do dahlias grow best? Well, dahlias love to be in fertile, well-drained soil. They like that extra food. They love to be in a sunny location. And make sure to leave space in between plants to allow for growth, especially with larger cultivars. A good gauge is about 60 centimetres apart. That's quite a bit, but they do grow pretty big. Plant out the tubers in late May or early June if your area is prone to cool temperatures. And if you have purchased and grown plants in containers, then you can plant those almost straight away. Dahlias like watering regularly because they do take that extra bit of moisture. So when the weather is dry and hot, make sure there's enough water growing, especially if you're growing them in containers. And you can apply granular general purpose fertilizer when they're planted to make sure there's plenty of food available. This is key to encourage, plenty of flower and also big leaves as well to produce energy. And they just keep on producing these spectacular blooms. If you want to boost flowering, you can use potassium-rich liquid fertilizer from early June to early September. And smaller varieties that grow up to about 50 centimetres are great in containers. Try varieties like Dahlia Gallery Vincent or Dahlia Moonfire, and there's another nice one, Marie Schnug. Love that name, Marie Schnug. If you're growing in containers, feed them once a week. How long do Dahlia plants live for? Well, generally the perennials or Dahlia perennials can live for a minimum of 3 years, but Dahlias can last for many years if they're cared for, of course, in the right conditions. How big do Dahlias grow? Was another very big question on Google, and depending on the variety, Dahlias range in height from 40 centimetres to over 6 foot, such as a really nice Dahlia called Chat Noir. Big one, that. And the blooms can range in diameter from 5 centimetres to 30 centimetres. How long do Dahlias flower for is an incredibly popular question. In general rule of thumb, 120 days or 4 months. You get a lot of bang for your buck with Dahlias, and they can be in bloom from July right the way through to October. But deadheading would encourage more flowering, of course, and when and how to do that I'll be coming on to. Are Dahlias good for bees? Well, you can see right in front of me, the bees are all over them. Now, they're really good for pollinators, including bees and butterflies, and single flowering Dahlias are better for pollinators, as the pollen, it's easier for them to access. Are Dahlias frost hardy? Well, Dahlias aren't fully frost hardy. The foliage will be killed off from the frosts of autumn, winter, so keep up to speed with the weather in your area from September. You can't leave the tubers in the ground, or you can store them somewhere, lift them up and keep them in a frost-free area during winter, depending really how exposed your garden is. How to lift the tubers? Well, dig around the clump to lift the tubers, and use a fork because it's easier just to tease them out rather than a spade that could slice them, and take care not to damage them as you're taking them out. Shake as much soil off as possible, then using secateurs, cut down the Dahlia stems and compost the leaves in your own composting. Never waste anything in a garden, always recompost it. And use a hose or a bucket of water to wash the tubers and stand them upside down to dry. And once dry, pack them in a box and cover them with dry compost. Any moisture can lead to a little bit of rot, of course. You can also store them in vermiculite, which is a very dry substance, or you can wrap them in newspapers. The secret is making sure you don't leave them damp area. What colours do Dahlias come in? Dahlias come in pretty much any colour for flowers that you can really think of, from reds and whites and oranges and yellows and purples and lavenders. Such a beautiful colour. Just look at the ones here, they're so very vibrant, and you can get Dahlias that have multiple colours in their blooms, and that's a variety of different combinations, dark blends, variegated and bicolours. They are truly a beautiful flower. Research suggests that they're very genetically volatile. Even growing conditions may lead to a change in colour. Bicoloured Dahlias are often randomly occurring. It's an abnormality really, and it may not recur the following year if you're getting this variance of colour. And sometimes the flower regrows again with two colours it particularly favours. Did you know that within 20,000 cultivars of Dahlias you won't find a true blue? It may have been attempted many times in the past, but with no success. You also won't find a truly black Dahlia flower either. And anything that appears to be, well, the closest things really is a dark red or dark purple. Do Dahlias flower in the first year? Well, Dahlias will flower in the first year. Now, this can be as early as 8 weeks after planting. Told you they grow pretty strong, depending on the weather, of course, and whether you're growing from tubers or seeds. Do Dahlias need staking? Well, it depends on a couple of things. One, the variety, of course. Taller, they more need staking. More of an exposed area, they're going to need staking. But dwarf bedding Dahlias don't need staking because they're quite small. But Dahlias that are quite top heavy and tall will need some stout posts or canes to support them, one per stem. And Dahlias with multi-headed petal blooms, they're particularly big. They are very likely to need a bit of staking because they're so heavy at the top. But Dahlias with smaller blooms will need less staking. Actually, you get plenty of flowers on the top, and a couple of bamboo canes should be sufficient. Do dahlias need deadheading? Well, by deadheading dahlias regularly, you're more likely to get them to reflower, so it's really worth doing. You can do it as often as weekly. I find it very therapeutic to take off the old flowers and watch the new buds come through. This, of course, will ensure the plant puts energy not into producing seed, but into more flower production. And when deadheading, cut above the first pair of leaves that you find below the flower head. What plants go really well with dahlias? Well, a real favourite is Cosmos. It's a classic pairing, particularly if you choose a single flowering dahlia. Both are great as pollinator friendly, so they're fantastic to put into one area. Verbena bonariensis, that massive, beautiful purple favourite, they have a lot of loose stems that complement dahlias without creating an over-dense planting area. Achilles, they're pretty good as well. They have similar growing conditions, are very tolerant. When do dahlias die off, or really die back at the end of the season? Well, it's once the first frost of the season starts. You know, you get that really cold one, that starts to initiate the die back, and it typically is late autumn, likely to be November time, the end of November. When to cut down dahlias? Well, these should be done in autumn once the foliage has been blackened by the frost, and you cut the stems to approximately 10 to 15 centimetres from the ground. If you live in a milder region and you also have pretty well drained soil, then the tubers can be left in the ground with a deep layer of bark or mulch to protect against frosts. When is it best to start taking your dahlias that you've overwintered indoors and take them outside? Well, the best place to do that is to start watering them again, potting them up, and when they're ready and established back into containers, then you can take them and plant them outside in May when you're quite free of frosts. Can you divide dahlias? Yes, and it should be done at least every 2 to 3 years, but that depends, of course, on the variety and the size of the plant. Now, the tubers multiply quickly, so if you're doing particularly well, you can do it every year, and this way you guarantee your garden produces plenty of blooms. So how do you divide dahlias? Well, you divide your dahlias by lifting the tuber using the garden fork, as I mentioned earlier, so you don't damage any of the tubers themselves, and divide using either a spade or a pair of secateurs to pull them apart. And it is then up to you whether you plant them again straight away or you store them and plant them for the following year. Will dahlias spread? Well, it's unlikely because dahlias don't really self-seed easily. And unless you divide your tubers, they will only grow one plant per original tuber. That's why splitting them is pretty good. And sometimes these tubers will divide on their own, but if you want to multiply your yield, the best bet is to divide them yourself. Now, you don't have to put them all back into the garden because you are producing new plants. You might want to gift them to friends or members of the family. It's a lovely sharing plant, dahlias. What's the common problems with dahlias and how do you fix them? Well, if your dahlia is producing a great deal of foliage but not enough blooms, then you may have planted it in a position that is not sunny enough. Now, dahlia should get at least 6 hours of sunlight per day, otherwise they will stretch growing towards where the light is. Or the temperature in your soil may be a little too cold. You may also be giving your dahlias a little bit too much nitrogen in the feed, where the energy of the nitrogen goes to foliage rather than flower itself, and phosphorus or potassium is pretty good in encouraging more blooms. Why don't my dahlia buds open? Well, that's a pretty good question. It's either due to a couple of things. One, insect has damaged the plant itself. Otherwise, it could be caused by too much or not enough water. So check the soil and treat your dahlia accordingly. Why is my dahlia leggy and tall? Well, if your dahlia is getting quite tall and maybe a little bit leggy, it may be because it's not receiving enough sunlight and is growing to try and find it. What are the common diseases? Well, there are 3 to keep in mind. First one is powdery mildew, botrytis, and verticillium wilt are the 3 really common ones. Powdery mildew can be avoided if you water the base of the plant and try to keep the leaves dry. Pick off any affected foliage. Botrytis, otherwise known as grey mould, is encouraged by cloudy and wet weather. Remove affected leaves as soon as you spot them, as botrytis can spread to the stem and kill the plant. Also, make sure there's plenty of airflow around your plants as well. It dries it out, stop them getting damp, which is an ideal condition for botrytis to spread. Now, verticillium wilt is another one that's caused by a soil-borne fungus, and you really need to get on top of that one very quickly. Some of the common pests for dahlia, slugs and snails, of course, and you can see some evidence on my leaves in front. You can't help it. It is a living garden. You're going to try to avoid this by leaving the surface as dry as possible. Don't water too late at night, making sure that the area is left all damp, because that's just what the slugs and snails like. There are many organic deterrents that you can use, coffee grounds, eggshells, and there's many things online that you can buy. Another is to, of course, patrol your garden and remove the slugs and snails, either with your fingers, with some gloves on, a peg, chopsticks, and take them out of the way. Are dahlias poisonous to humans? Well, dahlia flowers and tubers are edible to humans. They're not poisonous at all. The tubers themselves have been eaten since the Aztecs of South America. They're high in inulin, which is good for bacteria in your gut, and they're also low-calorie carbohydrate. Anders Dahl categorized dahlias as the vegetable originally, and they're named after him, so he'd know. They're also rumoured to taste like a combination of potatoes and radishes. Dahlias are not safe for pets though. There's a toxic substance in them that causes skin irritation and little tummy upsets for dogs. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you found it fascinating. I do love dahlias. My bees love dahlias. They're really bright and brilliant colours, and they make sure your garden looks beautiful. So treat your garden to some lovely dahlias, and please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more great content like this. And also remember, turn on your notifications, and I will let you know of great free videos to inspire gardening ideas. Enjoy the dahlias.